Thanks for clicking on to the Wayne.com website. It's hard to believe, but after this Friday night, literally 50% of our teams in our area will have played 50% of their season. You're only guaranteed 9 games in the regular season, 1 game in the postseason. 50% will be 50% done.
Yeah, and we, knock on wood, continue to have beautiful weather on Friday nights.
And 40% of the time, it works every time.
Every time.
That's like us here on Inside the Zone.
Right.
Let's talk a little bit about this huge game because it's a game not only that has SAC implications, but it's a top 10 teams in the 6A state poll. In the latest poll that came out last week, the new AP poll comes out tomorrow, but you had Snyder ranked 6th, Homestead ranked 9th. Both of them won this past week, so at the very least, they should still be at 6 and 9. When you take a look at this game, what strikes you first about this matchup of undefeated teams that'll go quite a long way in determining who wins the victory bell this season, especially after Homestead's win over Dwenger last week?
Sure, yeah. Looking back at last Friday, as impressive as that offense was with Braden Hardwick going for 215 yards, Luke Goody throwing some big-time passes, it was the defense that impressed me the most for Homestead. You know, for the better part of a decade, we've had good Homestead offenses that have been offset by defenses that gave up a lot of points. And this year, and even the last couple years, I think, has been different mentality at Homestead in terms of that defense. We saw Cam Rogers have a huge game despite his hand still wrapped like a club. And, that secondary stepping up. Donovan Leonard, really playing good at the corner position. Ryan Burton. Just a whole cast of characters on that defense that was really able to limit Dwenger. And now the bigger challenge coming up. I don't know if it's a bigger challenge, but it is as big of a challenge with Snyder. But you have to feel pretty good if you're Homestead going back home to play this game after the way both sides of the field played last week, particularly that defense.
Here's the one thing that I'll say. I think we know, based on what we saw against Dwenger, I think we know a little bit more about Homestead than we know about Snyder at this point. Because you're looking at Snyder's competition. They have the 1-point game against Carroll, which is obviously a nice win. But their other wins are Northside, Concordia, and Southside. Those teams are not going to finish in the top half of the SAC. So they've been challenged really once this season. Homestead got challenged last week in a good game that they won on the road. But I saw Snyder against Southside last week, and I know they knew that they had the talent to make that a blowout type of game.
Yeah.
But they didn't look as sharp as they know as Kurt Tippmann would have liked, especially in the first quarter. The defense looked pretty good, but the offense had a little bit of trouble executing and getting on a roll early. That's not something, if they get into a shootout type scenario with Homestead, that's not something that they want to see on Friday night.
Yeah, for sure. And we still kind of don't know how good Carroll is. So that 1-point win for Snyder is still up in the air on just how good Carroll is. And they could be really good. We're really not sure yet, and we'll find out this week kind of where they're at. But I think Snyder is not as a dynamic of an offensive a team as we've seen the last couple of years for that team. And so I think the running game is solid, passing game is solid, but it's just not dynamic. It doesn't have that huge big play ability that it's known to have. And I think that plays in the hands of Homestead. Not that Homestead's going to win this game. I think it's a toss-up, but I think it helps that Snyder offense isn't as overpowering as we've seen recently.
And you mentioned the Homestead defense. I mean, when we think of Homestead, we think of Zach Terrell. We think of, if it's not at the quarterback position, it's guys like Ben Skronik. It's guys that put up a lot of numbers offensively. You think they're going to try and outscore people. This is a defense. I know Chad Zolman talked about it in the preseason. This is a defense that has guys that want to go out and hit people. And you've really seen that so far this season, that they're not just one side of the football. And really, they have all 3 components of the game. Gunnar Fry with a huge field goal last week. I mean, they've got a lot working for them, especially on the defensive side.
Defensive front, that play along the defensive line was key last Friday in slowing that running game of Dwenger down. And it's going to be just as important to limit Lenny Bennett and those running backs of Snyder this week and put the pressure on John Barnes Jr.
What's your take in this one? If you had to pick a team, who would you go with?
It's tough to pick Homestead after not to pick Homestead after what they did last week. I don't know. We have to do some research on the last time a team beat Dwenger and Snyder back-to-back weeks. That's a Herculean task, right? To put such an emotional win behind you and prepare for a completely new emotional test. So I'm going to take Snyder on an edge. and could very well be wrong. I think it's really a toss-up game to go either way.
All right, it should be very interesting on Friday night. It'll be our highlight zone game of the week, as it should be. You mentioned another team in the SAC that we're going to find out a lot about this week, Carroll. They're at Bishop Dwenger. Obviously, the Saints are looking to bounce back after that 17-15 loss against Homestead. Meanwhile, Carroll has looked pretty good.
Yeah.
Jeffrey Becker has been able to step into the quarterback position. Not a lot of sophomores can do that in the SAC. He looked good not only against some of the bottom half of the SAC teams that we've seen, but he looked really good against Snyder too.
He did.
Really kept them in that ball game. So how do you see this one playing out, knowing that Carroll is still a little bit of a mystery at this point in the year?
I really like the way Jeffrey Becker's been playing all season long. Leighton Mitchell, his favorite receiver, has just been on each and every week. And an unassuming guy, like 6 foot, 185. He's an ops intern, so we know where he gets his talent. So
and his knowledge of the game.
Absolutely. So
Directly from you, they siphon it. They put
Sure.
a brain cap on, boom. It's
why
like
not?
young
Why not?
Frankenstein style.
Well, yeah, exactly. So, that's a great dynamic that they have offensively. That defense has been playing pretty good, pitched a couple of shutouts this year as well. So I think Carroll's going to be ready for this game. It's still kind of how good is Carroll, because it hasn't played a big team outside of Snyder. So we'll also see if Bishop Dwenger can bounce back in a big way.
One thing I like about Carroll is the defensive line play. And Larry Seibel at 6'4",
Yeah.
like every time I've seen Carroll play, that guy's in the offensive backfield doing something. I know that Giannini Belizaire gets a lot of credit, as he should. Some of the Homestead guys, guys that you may have heard a little bit more about.
Yeah.
But I really like him and the way that he's been able to lead this Carroll defense. They're only giving up 7 points a game. That's pretty salty no matter who you play when it comes to the SAC.
Yeah, for sure. And was really able to shut down Northrop, a team that we felt maybe could hang it around last week for a little bit. All three levels of the defense has studs for Carroll, and they'll be ready on Friday night.
And one thing about Dwenger is I think we feel like we know what we have in Dwenger, but I'm not sure, the stats play that out in terms of the fact that they've won games against Wayne, against Northside, and against Southside. Those are their first 3 games.
Yeah.
And then it was Homestead last week. And you never know. That's a small sample size against one of the elite teams in the SAC. Just one game that they lost by 2 points at home. I mean, we may not know as much about Bishop Dwenger as we think we do, is I guess my point.
Yeah, and maybe this resets Dwenger as far as them figuring out how good they are, right? So they lose Hayden Ellinger for the second half last week, which was big. He's their leading tackler, leader on that defense. Offensively, though, we felt like, with Brendan Lytle playing the way he had played in the first 3 games, this is a team that's going to consistently put up 30 points a game, and they're held to 15 points in last Friday's game in single digits until the last, minute and a half. So how does that defense or offense regroup? How do they get that running game going? Because they were very one-dimensional last Friday against Homestead. That's going to be very important against Carroll.
In the Northeast 8, we've got one huge game and another game that'll impact the conference race. Let's talk about those right now. Leo at East Noble. We kind of had this one circled at the beginning of the season. They're both 4-0. East Noble coming off a nice win on the road against DeKalb. We mentioned that might be kind of a measuring stick to determine who's going to be in the Northeast 8 race and who might be out of it. But 35-7 at DeKalb, East Noble making a statement last week.
Here's the thing with East Noble is this game looks good on paper. And I think Leo is the team that has the best chance of getting East Noble a game. And I hope it is a good game on Friday. I just see what East Noble's body of work has been, and I'm not sure anybody's close to them in the NE8 if they're playing well.
I totally concur with you.
I mean,
the competition level, they really went out and played some tough non-conference schools that are their size or bigger and won those games.
Yeah, they're beating Plymouth on the road. They take care of Mishawaka, which is a very good 5A program. And they come back and just handled DeKalb last week, the biggest game in Waterloo in 20 years. And Leo, I keep pointing to that game at Norwell where they, win on a field goal, that 3-2 game, and I'm thinking, man, if they can only score 3 points on Norwell, which is an improved Knights team, don't get me wrong.
Oh, their defense is for real down at Norwell, but yes.
Can they go to East Noble and Bailey Parker and hang around? And I think that's a big question. It's no knock on anybody in the NE8 because I think it's a very competitive conference. I just think East Noble's a cut above everybody else at this point.
Yeah, I know. You take a look at the body of work of Leo. They've got wins against Woodland, who's struggling this season.
Yeah.
Angola, who's also struggling this season. Norwell, who, again, they won but put up only 3 points. Yeah. And then a New Haven team that's also struggling this season. Now, part of the reason those teams are struggling is because they had to play Leo. Yeah. But You're right. East Noble appears more prepared for a game like this at this point of the season. They've played good teams week in and week out, it seems.
And difficult to go to Kendallville and get a win. It's going to be another really great atmosphere in Kendallville on Friday night. Leo, I think, you get Peyton Wall going. That will help you control the pace of the game. It seems like more and more people are stacking that box to try to take Peyton Wall away. Jackson Barber, the sophomore, can he step in, make some plays vertically to really open up the defense? But, man, Leo is going to have to put up some points, I think, on Friday night. I just don't know if they have a strong enough offense to hang around.
And Leo had been going with kind of the 2-quarterback system. It seems like Jackson Barber has taken hold of that race. A couple of touchdown passes, a rushing touchdown last week. He is a guy to watch in that game for sure. Now, this is an elimination type of game when it comes to the conference championship. You've got DeKalb at Columbia City. DeKalb obviously looking to bounce back. Columbia City, as always, the front half of their schedule is easier than the back half of their schedule. But when you've got a 6'4" sophomore quarterback that can sling it, you got Sievers, you got Giles, you got multiple Bedwells.
Yeah.
You have a lot of weapons on Columbia City. So how do you approach this game knowing that, like I said, this is a game that both teams need to win if they want to stay in the conference championship race?
We feel after like 3 or 4 weeks of a season, we kind of know how teams are, where they slot in terms of the hierarchy of the area. But Columbia City is one of those teams we still don't know because, like you mentioned, their schedule is so backloaded. So they play all the big guys of the NE8 coming up. They have DeKalb. They have New Haven, who's struggling, but is a solid team. They have Leo. They have East Noble. All those teams coming up. So this is step one for Columbia City, is taking on a DeKalb team that wants to bounce back after last week. You mentioned Bolt and just how good he has been, but it's one of those let's wait and see with Columbia City, and now we'll start figuring out just how good they are in taking on the Barons.
3 games outside of our biggest 2 conferences in the area that have caught my eye. South Adams at Monroe Central. Monroe Central still a top 10 team despite the loss to Adams Central. They gave the Jets all they wanted, but the Jets pulled it out 21-13 a couple of weeks ago. So South Adams travels to Monroe Central. South Adams just looks like a juggernaut on offense. That's what happens when you put up 76 points.
It does.
What is it about South Adams that's allowed them to have that kind of success, and how do they go into a game where they've got to travel all the way down to Randolph County, play a top 10 team, but they have to be feeling pretty confident about what they've got going into this one?
A little bit. South Adams has the amount of athletes that a 2A, 3A team would have. I mean, you look at offensively, them coming out when they go 4 wide with a running back in the backfield. I mean, how many 1A teams can come out in the spread and legitimately have 4 guys that can catch passes for you? James Arnold has played tremendous. Nick Stuber has been great. Nick Miller, all these guys. That offensive front has been solid. Yeah. I mean, Aiden Warner, I think, is probably, you could make a case for him to be MVP of the area because he balled out in week 1 when he was in for Arnold. He's leading the team in receptions. He's one of the leading tacklers. He's their place kicker. I mean,
we saw him with a pick 6 yesterday or last Friday.
The kid is great. So there's athletes all over the field for South Adams, and they're not that bunch it in. We're going to beat you with our wing T type thing. It works for some teams, but South Adams, when they come out in that grouping, those personnel groupings, that teams just can't match up with it. They don't have 4 defensive backs that can match up with 4 wide receivers. So that's how South Adams is beating teams. I feel like they're going to get a win on the road this week.